On the outskirts of Willow Creek, where wildflowers dance with prairie grass, a storm brews between two worlds that were never meant to collide. James Miller's calloused hands tell the story of a man who's worked the same failing farm for 15 years. His dreams buried as deep as his father's old fence posts. But fate has a way of turning the soil of destiny when you least expect it. When a magnificent thoroughbred appears on his land, bleeding and broken, James doesn't see a $1 million racehorse. He sees a creature in need of mercy. What he can't see is the woman watching from the shadows, a billionaire heiress who spent her life surrounded by people hunting her fortune. For the first time, Alexandra Carter witnesses something her vast wealth could never buy: pure, unselfish kindness. And it's about to change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning fog clung to the withered cornfields like a shroud, obscuring the boundaries between earth and sky. James Miller stood on his front porch, coffee mug warming his weathered hands, watching the sun struggle to pierce through the haze. The ancient farmhouse creaked behind him, a sound that reminded him of his father's arthritic joints in those final years. 15 years had passed since Thomas Miller's hands last touched this soil, but his presence lingered in every corner of the 200-acre farm. The property had been in the Miller family for 4 generations, each one promising the next they'd keep the legacy alive. Now, that burden rested solely on James's shoulders that felt heavier with each passing season. He sat down his coffee and unfolded the letter that had arrived yesterday, though he'd memorized every word. Final notice screamed across the top in angry red letters. The bank wanted their money, and they weren't interested in another story about bad weather or poor yields. 3 missed payments. That's all it had taken to push him to the edge of losing everything. "You're up early again, James Miller," a familiar voice called from the road. Martha Wheeler, his 70-year-old neighbor, stood at his gate, a covered dish in her hands. She'd been his mother's best friend, and after both his parents passed, she'd appointed herself his unofficial guardian angel. "Morning, Martha." He managed a smile, quickly folding the notice and shoving it into his pocket. "You didn't have to bring anything." "Nonsense. Your father always said my apple pie could cure anything from a broken heart to a bad harvest." She made her way up the path, her cane leaving small indents in the morning damp earth. "And don't think I haven't noticed you're not eating proper meals again." James took the pie, the warmth seeping through the cloth covering. "The crops need attention more than my stomach does right now." Martha's eyes, sharp despite her age, caught the edge of the letter peeking from his pocket. "Bills don't get paid by working yourself to death, son. Your father learned that the hard way." The memory hit him like a physical blow, finding his father in the north field, slumped over the tractor's wheel, his heart finally giving out after years of fighting to keep the farm alive. James had been 23 then, fresh out of agricultural college, with dreams of modernizing the farm. Instead, he'd inherited a mountain of debt and a legacy he couldn't bear to lose. "I just need time," he said, more to himself than Martha. "1 good season, that's all it'll take." Martha's weathered hand found his arm. "There's no shame in selling, James. Your parents would understand. Sometimes holding on hurts more than letting go." He shook his head, jaw set. "This land is all I have left of them, all I have left of who I am." "No." Martha's voice was gentle but firm. "You're more than this farm, James Miller. You're your father's kindness and your mother's strength. Those don't depend on ownership deeds." The morning sun finally broke through the fog, casting long shadows across the fields. In the distance, the old barn's paint peeled like scabs from a wound, and the fence line sagged in places where he hadn't had time to repair it. But beneath the wear and decay, he could still see the farm's bones, strong, resilient, worth fighting for. "I should get to work," he said, carefully setting the pie on the porch railing. "Thank you, Martha, for everything." She watched him stride toward the barn, his father's old work boots leaving familiar prints in the dirt. That boy, she sighed, to herself, has got his daddy's stubborn heart and his mama's pride. Lord help him learn to bend before he breaks. Inside the barn, James began his morning routine, feeding the few animals he had left, checking equipment that was held together more by prayer than parts. Each task was a reminder of what he stood to lose, but also why he couldn't give up. This wasn't just land and buildings. It was the story of his family, written in decades of sweat and sacrifice. The bank's deadline loomed like storm clouds on the horizon. He had 30 days to make a miracle happen, or the last miller would also be the last to work this land. Isha. He stepped out into the growing morning light. James didn't know that fate was already setting in motion events that would change everything, beginning with a wounded horse and ending with a love story that would become local legend. The click of designer heels echoed through the marble corridors of Carter Industries' top floor. Alexandra Carter strode past floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of Manhattan, her reflection ghosting across the glass like an apparition in Armani. At 32, she'd already earned every strand of her prematurely silver-streaked dark hair, the price of inheriting an empire at 25. "The board's waiting, Miss Carter." Her assistant Michael hurried alongside her, tablet in hand. "Mr. Reynolds is particularly agitated about the Singapore merger." Alexandra allowed herself a small smile. "Reynolds is always agitated about something. Usually whatever makes us the most money." The boardroom doors swung open at her approach. 12 faces turned to watch her enter, each wearing a carefully crafted mask of respect, tinged with varying degrees of resentment. Being the youngest CEO in the company's history and a woman had that effect on men 3 decades her senior. "Gentlemen," she took her place at the head of the table, "shall we discuss why you're all so concerned about a merger that's already increased our market share by 12%? Reynolds, red-faced and corpulent, cleared his throat. "Miss Carter, while the numbers are impressive, the risk assessment shows exactly what I predicted 3 months ago." She cut in smoothly, sliding documents across the polished mahogany. "Our Asian markets have stabilized, European investments are up, and that risky sustainable energy division you all opposed has just landed 3 government contracts." The room fell silent. Alexandra had learned early that in this world, success was the only language that mattered. She'd become fluent in it, even if it meant speaking it alone. Later, in her private office, 60 stories above the city, Alexandra allowed her shoulders to drop slightly. Michael appeared with her afternoon. "Coffee? Black, no sugar?" like the bottom line she constantly had to defend. "There's also the matter of the charity gala next week," he reminded her. "The press is expecting you to bring a date." Alexandra's fingers tensed around her coffee cup. "The press can expect whatever they want. I'm not parading another fortune hunter around just to make good headlines. Your father always said—" "My father said a lot of things, Michael. He also said I'd never run this company as well as a man would." She turned to the window, watching clouds gather over the city. "Look how that turned out." The intercom buzzed. "Miss Carter, the stable master from Windcrest is on line 1. It's about Storm." Everything else faded away. Storm, her magnificent black thoroughbred, the one indulgence she permitted herself that had nothing to do with business. She'd bought him as a scared, skittish colt when everyone said he was too wild to train. Now he was her escape, her reminder that some things couldn't be controlled with money or power. "Put him through." She pressed the speaker button. "Tom, is everything all right?" The stable master's voice crackled with static and worry. "Miss Carter, I'm sorry. There was a thunderstorm last night. Storm." He broke through the fence. "We've got search parties out, but with the weather—" Alexandra felt her carefully constructed world tilt on its axis. "I'm on my way. Have my helicopter ready in 20 minutes. "Miss Carter," Michael protested. "The Tokyo conference call. Reschedule it." She was already gathering her things, heart pounding with an unfamiliar fear. Cancel everything for the next few days. The board won't like that. The board doesn't have to like it. She paused at the door, her mask slipping to reveal something vulnerable. He's not just a horse, Michael. He's the only one in my life who doesn't want anything from me except carrots and the occasional sugar cube. As her private elevator descended, Alexandra leaned against the cool metal wall. Storm was more than a pet. He was her anchor to a simpler truth, a reminder of who she might have been in another life. Somewhere in the gathering storm he was lost and possibly hurt. For the first time in years, all her money and power meant nothing. She didn't know it yet, but Storm was about to lead her to something her wealth could never buy, a chance at real love, with a man who saw past the empire to the woman who built it. Rain pounded against the windows of Willow Creek's only diner, turning the world outside into a watery blur. James sat in his usual booth, worn leather cracking beneath him, staring at a stack of unpaid bills spread across the sticky tabletop. The morning's mail had brought 3 more final notices, each one another nail in his farm's coffin. "More coffee, hon?" Sally, the waitress who'd known him since high school, stood by his table with a steaming pot. Her eyes flickered to the bills, then away with the practiced discretion of a small-town server. "Thanks, Sally." He covered the papers with his weathered hands. "How's Tommy doing in college?" "Oh, loving it. That scholarship was a blessing." She poured the coffee, then hesitated. "James, I heard the bank's been sending people around looking at properties." The coffee turned bitter in his mouth. "News traveled fast in Willow Creek, especially the kind you'd rather keep private." "Just routine assessments," he lied, knowing she wouldn't believe it. 2 tables over, the morning regulars were deep in conversation about the approaching storm system. "Gonna be a bad one," old Pete Johnson announced to anyone listening. "Worse than the flood of '98. James's stomach tightened. A major storm was the last thing he needed. The farm's drainage system was already failing, and he couldn't afford repairs. One bad flood could destroy what was left of his crops. The diner's bell chimed as Martha wheeled herself in, her cane hooked over the handle of her wheelchair. The morning's walk had clearly taken its toll. She'd finally conceded to using the chair on bad days. "James Miller," she called out, making her way to his booth. "I thought I'd find you here, hiding from your troubles." "Not hiding," he muttered. "Just strategizing." Martha snorted. "That's what your father called it too." She nodded to Sally for her usual tea. "Have you considered my suggestion about the Henderson offer?" James stiffened. The Hendersons owned the largest agricultural corporation in the county. They'd been trying to buy his land for years, offering what they called generous compensation for a property they'd probably turn into another industrial farming operation. "I'm not selling." "To them, Martha. They'd destroy everything my family built. And what exactly are you preserving right now?" Her voice was gentle but firm. "A dying farm. Memories don't pay bills, son." Before he could respond, thunder cracked overhead, making the diner's windows rattle. The rain intensified, drumming against the roof like artillery fire, 50 miles. Away, Alexandra stood in Storm's empty stable, rain soaking through her designer blazer. The broken fence boards told a story of panic, her proud, powerful horse, spooked by the storm, crashing through barriers that had always contained him. "We've got teams searching all the surrounding areas," Tom, the stablemaster, reported. But in this weather, lightning illuminated the darkened sky, and Alexandra flinched. Storm had always been terrified of thunderstorms, a remnant of his troubled early years. She'd spent countless nights in this stable, singing softly to him, while thunder raged outside. Now he was out there alone, possibly injured. Her phone buzzed. Michael, probably with another crisis from the board. She silenced it without looking. For 7 years, she'd given everything to Carter Industries. Every decision, every sacrifice had been for the company. Storm was the one thing she'd kept for herself. Her one connection to a world outside quarterly reports and shareholder meetings. "Miss Carter?" Tom's voice was hesitant. "There's something else. The vet mentioned Storm's been showing signs of anxiety lately, depression even. Animals can sense things, and with you being so busy lately, the words hit her like physical blows. Even here in her sanctuary, she'd let the Empire take precedence. When was the last time she'd taken Storm for a proper ride, just the two of them? When had she last spent a morning in the stable, brushing him and sharing secrets like she used to? Thunder boomed again, closer now. Somewhere out in the storm, Storm was running, afraid and alone. Just like she'd been after her father died, when the board circled like vultures, waiting for the young heiress to fail. "Expand the search," she ordered, her voice tight with determination. "I don't care what it costs. Find him." Back in Willow Creek, James stepped out of the diner into the downpour. Martha's words echoed in his head as he climbed into his truck. The engine coughed twice before starting, another repair he couldn't afford. Neither James nor Alexandra knew it yet, but the storm about to hit Willow Creek would change both their lives forever. Sometimes, when everything you've built starts falling apart, it's making room for something better to be built in its place. The storm hit Willow Creek like a hammer striking an anvil. Rain fell in sheets so thick they turned the farmhouse windows into waterfalls, while wind howled through every crack and crevice of the old building. James paced his living room, checking the weather radar on his ancient laptop between glances at the ceiling, where water had begun to seep through in the corner. A flash of lightning turned night to day, followed instantly by thunder that shook the foundations. In that brief illumination, something caught his eye through the window, movement near the barn, too large to be debris carried by the wind. "Damn it," he muttered, grabbing his raincoat. If the storm had spooked his neighbor's cattle through the fence again. The moment he stepped outside, the wind nearly knocked him off his feet. He fought his way toward the barn, raincoat whipping around him like angry wings. Another lightning flash, and this time he saw it clearly, a dark shape, massive and moving, definitely not cattle. His heart jumped into his throat. A horse, a magnificent black thoroughbred, but something was wrong with its gait. Even through the rain, he could see it was favoring its left side, head hanging low. "Easy there," he called out, keeping his voice steady despite the storm. The horses, head snapped up, eyes wild with fear and pain. In the next lightning flash, James saw blood mixing with rain on its flank. The animal was clearly expensive, its breeding evident in every line of its body despite its current condition. Someone must be looking for it, someone with money, judging by its quality. The smart thing would be to call the authorities, let them handle it. The horse whinnied in pain and fear as thunder cracked overhead. "To hell with smart," James muttered. He began moving closer, arms raised non-threateningly. "It's all right, big fella. Nobody's going to hurt you here." The horse watched him approach, muscles trembling with exhaustion and tension. Up close, James could see the wounds clearly. Deep cuts along its flank and leg, probably from crashing through a fence. The animal had run a long way, driven by storm and fear. "You've had quite a night, haven't you?" James kept his voice low and soothing, the way his father had taught him. Slowly, carefully, he reached out his hand. The horse's nostrils flared, testing his scent. Then, to James's surprise, it stepped forward and pressed its muzzle into his palm. "That's it. Good boy." He ran his hand along its neck, feeling the powerful muscles gradually relax under his touch. "Let's get you out of this rain." The walk to the barn seemed to take hours, though it couldn't have been more than minutes. The horse followed him willingly, as if it somehow knew he represented safety. Inside, James quickly prepared a stall with fresh hay, his mind already cataloguing what he'd need: bandages, antiseptic, probably antibiotics he couldn't afford. "This is going to hurt," he warned as he began examining the wounds by lantern. Light. The horse stood surprisingly still, only flinching occasionally as James cleaned the worst of the cuts. Outside, the storm raged on, but in the barn, a different kind of storm was brewing. James knew he should be reporting this, knew someone was probably searching frantically for this clearly valuable animal. But something in the horse's trust, in the way it had sought him out of all places to find shelter, touched something deep. In his soul. We'll figure it out in the morning, he promised, both to the horse and himself. For now, you just rest. Miles away, in a luxurious office overlooking the storm-lashed city, Alexandra's phone rang. Miss Carter, we've expanded the search radius, but with this weather, we might have to wait until morning. She gripped the phone tighter, staring out at the rain. Keep looking, whatever it takes. Neither of them knew it yet, but Storm had already found exactly where he needed to be. Dawn broke over Willow Creek, painting the storm-battered landscape in shades of gold. James hadn't slept, spending the night in the barn monitoring his unexpected guest. The horse's wounds weren't as deep as he'd initially feared, but infection was still a serious concern. My daddy swore by this, he murmured, mixing honey with herbs in a small bowl. It was an old remedy, one passed down through generations of horse people, said nature knows better than any fancy medicine. The horse watched him with intelligent eyes, surprisingly calm despite its ordeal. James had seen enough spooked animals. To know this one had been well trained, loved even. The thought of its owner searching desperately made his conscience twinge. But the morning's papers and local news had shown no reports of a missing horse. A knock at the barn door made both. Man and horse start. James, Martha's voice called out. Sally from the diner said your truck's been here all night. Are you all right? He opened the door to find Martha balancing precariously on her cane, holding a basket. Her eyes widened at the sight of the magnificent black horse. Lord above, where did this creature come from? Storm brought him, James said, taking the basket. Found him injured last night. Martha moved closer, her experienced eye taking in the horse's breeding. This is no farm horse, James. This is money on 4 legs. I know. He began applying the herbal mixture to the wounds, but he needed help. What was I supposed to do? Call the authorities for one. But Martha's voice held no judgment. She watched the gentle way James handled the horse, saw how the animal leaned into his touch. You've got your father's way with them. He always said a horse knows a good heart. Miles away, Alexandra paced the floors of her country estate's main office, where she'd set up a command center for the search. Maps covered every surface, marked with grid patterns and search zones. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing. Board members demanding her return, shareholders nervous about her absence, reporters sniffing for a story. We've got every veterinary clinic and stable within 50 miles on alert, Michael reported, looking haggard after the sleepless night. But the storm damaged a lot of communication lines. Some areas are still hard to reach. Alexandra stopped at the window, watching another search team head out. He's hurt, Michael, I can feel it. And he's alone. Miss Carter. Michael hesitated. The board is meeting this afternoon about the Singapore merger. They're threatening to proceed without your input. Let them. Her voice was steel. Storm is more important. Back at the farm, James mixed fresh feed with additional supplements from his dwindling supply. The horse ate eagerly. A good sign. Martha had gone home, but returned with old medical supplies she'd kept from her husband's veterinary days. That. Leg needs proper wrapping, she instructed, watching James work, and those cuts should be checked for debris. James nodded, already ahead of her. His hands moved with practiced confidence, each touch gentle but firm. The horse responded to his calm energy, standing quietly even when he cleaned the deeper wounds. You need a name, he told the animal, not expecting the pang of attachment he felt. Just until we find your real one. Something about the horses. Wrigglebearing, the way it had appeared out of the storm, like a mythical creature, sparked his imagination. How about Phantom? The horse nickered softly, pushing its nose against his chest. Martha smiled, recognizing the look in James's eyes. The same one he'd had as a boy when his father gave him his first pony. Be careful, James, she warned, softly. This one isn't yours to keep. I know, he said, but his hands never stopped their healing work. Sometimes, he thought, the most important things in life were the ones you had to let go. 3 days had passed since the storm, and James found himself settling into a new rhythm. His mornings now started earlier, drawn to the barn by something more than duty. The horse he'd named Phantom had become his sunrise companion, greeting him with soft nickering that made the weight of his troubles feel lighter. "Looking better today," he murmured, running expert hands along the healing wounds. The herbal remedies were working their magic. The cuts were closing clean, and the limp was barely noticeable now. But it was more than physical healing he witnessed. Each day he saw more personality emerging, more trust building between them. Want to try something new? James led Phantom out of the barn into the misty morning. The horse's ears pricked forward with interest, nostrils flaring too. Take in the fresh air. In the growing light, his black coat shone like polished onyx, confirming James's suspicions about his valuable breeding. They walked together to the small training paddock, its fence weathered but sturdy. James had spent the previous evening repairing weak spots, using materials he couldn't really afford. One more expense on a growing pile, but somehow he couldn't bring himself to regret it. "Easy now," he said softly, opening the gate. Phantom stepped in cautiously, then surprised him by breaking into a gentle trot around the perimeter. The horse's natural grace was stunning. Even injured, his movements had a fluid poetry that spoke of exceptional training. Martha watched from her porch, binoculars in hand. She'd never tell James, but worry had kept her monitoring his interactions with the mysterious horse. Now seeing them move together in the morning light, her worry shifted to a different kind of concern. "You're getting attached," she told him later when he stopped by with fresh coffee. "I see the way you look at that horse." James stared into his cup. "He needed help, Martha, that's all this is." "Mm-hmm." She gave him a knowing look. "And I suppose the feed store bill you just put on credit was purely medical necessity?" He flushed. The premium feed had cost more than he should have spent, but seeing Phantom's condition improve made it worth every penny. "I'll figure something out, James." Martha's voice softened. "That horse belongs to someone who's probably searching right now." "I know." He did know, had known from the first moment, but knowing didn't make it easier. "I've called around, checked online. No reports of a missing horse matching his description." Martha raised an eyebrow. "In this county, maybe, but a horse like that, his owner could be from anywhere." Miles away, Alexandra's search was expanding. Her private investigators had widened, their radius moving systematically through rural areas where a horse might seek shelter. She'd postponed 3 board meetings, delegated the Singapore merger oversight, and hadn't been to her Manhattan office in days. "Miss Carter." Michael entered her temporary command center, tablet in hand. "We've got something. A feed store in Willow Creek reported an unusual purchase. Premium horse feed, bought on credit by a local farmer. It's probably nothing, but where?" Alexandra leaned over the map, hope flickering in her chest. They'd had false leads before, but something about this one felt different. Small town, about 50 miles from where Storm was last seen. The terrain matches. He could have made it there during the storm. Alexandra traced the route with her finger. "Get me everything you can on this farmer. And Michael, be discreet. If it is Storm, I don't want to spook him again." Back at the farm, James sat on the paddock fence, watching Phantom graze. The horse had taken to following him around like a shadow, coming to his whistle, accepting treats with gentle dignity. In just 3 days, they'd developed a bond that felt almost mystical. "You're something special," he told the horse, who lifted his head at the sound of James's voice. "Someone out there must be missing you something fierce." Phantom walked over, resting his head against James's knee. The gesture was so trusting, so natural, it made his heart ache. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine keeping him, finding a way to afford his care, building a life around this unexpected gift the storm had brought. But deep down, he knew Martha was right. A horse like this had a home somewhere, and someone who loved him. James might be broke, might be losing his farm, but he still had his integrity. When that someone found their way to Willow Creek, he would do the right thing. He just hoped his heart could survive letting go. Willow Creek had exactly one hotel, a modest three-story building that had last seen renovation when Reagan was president. The arrival of a black Lincoln Navigator with tinted windows set the town gossip mill churning at full speed before. Alexandra had even stepped out of the vehicle. "Are you sure about this approach, Miss Carter?" Michael asked, eyeing the peeling paint of the hotel's facade. "We could have the authorities—" "No." Alexandra's voice was firm. "If Storm is here, I don't want to frighten him or spook whoever's been caring for him." She adjusted her casual clothes, designer jeans and a simple blouse that probably cost more than most local monthly salaries, but it was as understated as her wardrobe got. At the diner across the street, Sally nearly dropped her coffee pot when the elegant stranger walked in. The woman was trying to blend in, but everything about her, from her perfect posture to the way she surveyed the room, screamed big city money. "Coffee, hon?" Sally offered, already pouring a cup. In small towns, strangers were both sources of curiosity and opportunities for information gathering. "Thank you." Alexandra smiled, noting how the waitress lingered. "I'm looking for information about local farms in the area. I'm considering property investments." Sally's eyebrows rose slightly. "Farms around here aren't much for investing, unless you're looking to lose money." She hesitated, then added, "though some might be more desperate to sell than others." Alexandra caught the hint in her voice. "Any in particular?" "Well, the Miller place has been struggling since Thomas passed. His boy James works himself half to death trying to keep it going, but—" Sally shook her head. "Banks aren't known for their patience." The bell above the door chimed and Sally's attention shifted. "Speaking of—" "Morning, James." The usual. Alexandra turned slightly, watching in the wall mirror as a man entered. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe early 30s, with the lean, muscled build of someone who worked the land. His clothes were worn but clean, and there was a quiet dignity in the way he carried himself despite the obvious weight on his shoulders. "Thanks, Sally." His voice was warm, gentle even, "and maybe one of Martha's muffins. She claims she's tired of baking for me, but I notice she keeps sending them over." "That woman would adopt you if she could." Sally laughed, then shot a meaningful glance at Alexandra. "We take care of our own here." James settled into what was clearly his regular booth, spreading papers across the table. Even from her discreet vantage point, Alexandra could see they were bills, notices, and what looked like loan applications. "The Miller farm," she said quietly to Sally when she returned with more coffee. "How big is it?" 200 acres, give or take. Been in his family 4 generations. Sally's voice held a protective note. "James isn't some investment opportunity, miss. That land is his life." Alexandra nodded, understanding the warning. Through the mirror, she watched James run a hand through his hair in frustration, his coffee growing cold as he worked on his papers. There was something compelling about him, a strength that had nothing to do with his physical presence. Dinah's door opened again, and an elderly woman with a cane entered. "James Miller," she called out, making her way to his booth. "You were supposed to come by for breakfast." "Sorry, Martha." He quickly gathered his papers, got caught up with the new horse's morning exercises. Alexandra's coffee cup froze halfway. To her lips, her heart began to race. "That animal's eating better than you are," Martha scolded, but there was fondness in her voice. "Though I must say, he's looking healthier every day. You've got your father's touch with horses." James smiled, and for a moment the weight seemed to lift from his shoulders. "He's something special. Never seen a horse with such intelligence, such presence." Martha glanced around the diner, her sharp eyes lingering briefly on Alexandra. "And I suppose you've still had no luck finding his owner?" "I keep checking, but—" He shrugged. "Maybe it's better this way, at least for now." Alexandra set her cup down carefully, her hands trembling slightly. After a week of searching, of sleepless nights wondering if Storm was hurt or scared, she'd found him, but something made her hesitate, made her want to observe a little longer before revealing herself. Because in James Miller's voice when he spoke about the horse, her horse, she heard something unexpected. Love. The afternoon sun, cast long shadows across the Miller farm as Alexandra stood at the property line, her heart pounding. She'd sent Michael back to the hotel, needing to do this alone. From here, she could see the barn where Sally had said James kept the mysterious black horse. Her horse, Storm, a familiar nickering sound made her breath catch. There he was, in a small paddock, his coat gleaming with health despite the visible healing marks on his flank. He looked happy, peaceful in a way she hadn't seen in months. "Can I help you?" The voice startled her. James Miller stood a few yards away, work gloves tucked into his back pocket, watching her with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Up close, she could see the subtle details she'd missed in the diner. The slight crow's feet around his eyes that spoke of smiling despite hardship, the inherent gentleness in his stance despite his obvious strength. Alexandra faltered, suddenly unsure of her rehearsed speech. "I heard you had a horse." Something flickered in his eyes, concern, perhaps protection. News travels fast in small towns. It does. She took a breath, then gestured toward Storm. "He's beautiful." "He is." James's voice softened with genuine affection. "Found him during the storm last week. Injured, scared, couldn't just leave him out there." Storm's head lifted at the sound of James's voice, and to Alexandra's amazement, the horse trotted over to the fence. James pulled an apple from his pocket, offering it with a gentle murmur of praise. The sight made her throat tight. She'd never seen Storm take to anyone so naturally, not even her most experienced trainers. "You've done an amazing job with his injuries," she said, moving closer. Storm's ears pricked forward, finally registering her presence. His reaction was immediate, a loud whinny of recognition that made James step back in surprise. "You know this horse." It wasn't a question. James watched as Storm pressed against the fence, trying to reach Alexandra. The horse's excitement was unmistakable. "His name is Storm." Her voice cracked slightly. "And yes, he's mine." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken emotions. James's face went through a series of micro-expressions. Understanding, resignation, and something that looked like loss. I wondered when someone would come. A horse like him, he had to belong somewhere special. I've been searching since. The storm. Alexandra reached out to touch Storm's nose, feeling the familiar velvet softness. He was spooked by the thunder, broke through the fence at my estate. I've had search parties out for days. Estate? James looked at her more carefully now, taking in the subtle signs of wealth she could never quite hide. "You're not just someone's hired hand, are you?" "No." She met his eyes directly. "I'm Alexandra Carter, and I suspect you've been taking better care of my horse than I have lately." Recognition dawned on his face. Everyone in the region knew the Carter name. Alexandra waited for the change that usually came with this revelation, the sudden shift to deference or calculation. Instead, James just nodded thoughtfully. He needed help, he said simply. That's all that mattered. The honesty in his voice moved her. How long had it been since someone had spoken to her so directly, without agenda or artifice? Storm nudged her shoulder insistently, then stretched his neck to include James in his attention, as if unwilling to choose between them. "Your methods," she gestured to the healing wounds. "They're not conventional, old family remedies. My father—" James paused, a shadow crossing his face. "He taught me that sometimes the old ways are the best ways, though I apologize if I overstepped with someone else's horse." "Overstepped?" Alexandra laughed softly. "You saved him. And looking at him now, you did more than just heal his wounds." Their eyes met again, and something electric passed between them. Here was a man who saw a hurt creature and helped without thought of reward or recognition, who used his last dollars to buy premium feed for a horse that wasn't his, who was about to lose his family's legacy but still put an injured animal's needs first. Storm, sensing the tension, pushed his nose against James's chest, then Alexandra's shoulder, bringing them physically closer. The horse's agenda was clear. He wanted his two favorite humans to acknowledge each other. "Mr. Miller," Alexandra said carefully, I think we have a lot to talk about. James, he corrected, a small smile touching his lips. Anyone who's shared midnight barn duty with Storm should probably call me James. And there, in a simple paddock on a failing farm, with a horse playing matchmaker between them, two worlds began to merge. Sunset painted the farm in shades of amber as Alexandra followed James on what he called the evening rounds. She'd declined his offer to call Michael to pick her up, something about the simplicity of the moment making her reluctant to break its spell. Storm followed them like an oversized dog, occasionally nudging them closer together when they walked too far apart. He's never been this social, Alexandra admitted, watching Storm playfully lip at James's shirt sleeve. Usually, he only tolerates my stable hands. Horses know when they're being cared for, out of duty versus genuine concern. James ducked into the barn, emerging with two battered lawn chairs. My father used to say you can't fool a horse. They see right through to your heart. They settled outside the barn, the evening air warm and sweet with the scent of hay. Alexandra had sat in $1,000 restaurant chairs, less comfortable than this simple seat, watching James care for his few remaining animals with quiet competence. You said Carter, James ventured carefully. Any relation to Carter Industries? Alexandra tensed slightly. It's a big company. The lie of omission felt heavy on her tongue, but she wasn't ready to be Alexandra Carter, CEO, just yet. Here, she could just be Alexandra, Storm's owner, a woman sitting in a lawn chair watching the sunset with a man who didn't seem to care about her designer boots. Must be nice working for a place like that. There was no envy in his voice, just genuine curiosity. Stable job, good benefits. It has its challenges. She watched him scatter feed for his chickens. What about you? Has farming always been your dream? Something flickered across his face. Farming's in my blood. 4 generations of millers worked this land. He paused, then added quietly, though lately it feels more like quicksand than soil. The bank notices in the diner, she said softly. I saw them. Not exactly subtle about my troubles, am I? His laugh held no bitterness, only rueful acceptance. Dad always said a farmer's business is everybody's business in a small town. Storm wandered over, resting his head on Alexandra's shoulder. The gesture was so familiar, so comforting, like he was trying to tell her something. She reached up to stroke his nose, noticing how James watched them with a complex mix of emotions. You could have sold him, she said suddenly. A horse like this, you must have known he was valuable. It would have solved your problems. The thought never crossed my mind. The simplicity of his response, the fundamental honesty in it, made her chest tight. Some things matter more than money. Like what? Like doing right by a creature that trusts you. He stood, brushing off his jeans. Like keeping your word to a father who taught you character is all you really have in this world. A loud meow interrupted them as a scraggly orange cat wound between James's legs. And this, he grinned, scooping up the cat, is the real boss of the farm. Found her in the cornfield last spring. Seems I have a habit of taking in strays. Alexandra watched him cradle the cat with the same gentle hands. That had healed Storm, and something in her heart shifted. When was the last time she'd met someone who gave so freely, expected so little in return? The local paper lay forgotten on a nearby hay bale, its headline partially visible. Carter Industries CEO takes mysterious leave. Her stomach clenched. Soon he would know the whole truth. Soon this simple, perfect moment would be complicated by wealth and status and the weight of her responsibilities. I should go, she said reluctantly, standing. Storm needs his evening medication. Already gave it to him, James said. Mixed with molasses, just like you mentioned. He didn't leave a drop. Their eyes met in the fading light. And Alexandra felt that same electric connection from earlier. Here was a man who paid attention, who remembered small details, who cared simply because caring was in his nature. Stay for dinner, he offered suddenly. Martha brought over her famous pot roast. She always makes enough to feed an army. Alexandra knew she should decline. knew that every minute she spent here, every layer of herself she revealed, would make the eventual truth more complicated. But Storm was nudging her toward the farmhouse, and James was looking at her with those kind eyes. And for once in her life, Alexandra Carter decided to let her heart lead instead of her head. "I'd like that," she said softly. "I'd like that very much." The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Sally burst into the diner, waving the latest copy of the Willow Creek Gazette. The front page featured a photo that made James's coffee cup freeze halfway to his lips. Alexandra, dressed in an elegant business suit, standing at a podium with the Carter Industries logo behind her. CEO Alexandra Carter takes break from empire to search for missing horse, the headline blared. The article went on to detail her position as one of the youngest Fortune 500 CEOs, her recent handling of the Singapore merger, and her sudden disappearance from the corporate world to search for her prized thoroughbred. James Miller, Martha's voice cut through his shock. She stood at his booth, her own copy of the paper clutched in her hand. "Did you know?" He couldn't take his eyes off the photo. In it, Alexandra looked different, polished, powerful, untouchable. Nothing like the woman who'd sat in his battered lawn chair last night, laughing at his old farm stories and sharing Martha's pot roast. "No," he said quietly. "I didn't know." The bell above the diner door chimed. Alexandra walked in, wearing the same casual clothes as yesterday, but now James could see what he'd missed. The subtle designer labels, the perfect cut of her jeans, the watch on her wrist that probably cost more than his truck. The diner fell silent. Even Sally, never at a loss for words, stood motionless behind the counter. Alexandra's eyes found James, then dropped to the newspaper on his table. Something like pain flashed across her face. "I was going to tell you." "When?" The word came, out harsher than he'd intended. "Before or after you bought my farm out from under me?" "James, no." She stepped forward, then stopped as he stood abruptly. "That's not what this is, really." He gave a bitter laugh. "The CEO of Carter Industries just happens to show up at a failing farm. Was this some kind of research project? See how the other half lives? That's not fair." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "What happened yesterday, what's been happening between us, that was real." Storm's familiar nickering drifted through the diner's open window. The sound seemed to break something in James's chest. "You could have told me the truth." And what would that truth have changed? Alexandra's corporate mask slipped, revealing the woman he'd started to know. "Would you have looked at me the same way? Talked to me the same way? Or would I have just been another rich person playing at understanding your life?" Martha's cane tapped sharply on the floor. "James Miller, your father raised you better than to judge someone before hearing them out." "My father also taught me that honest people don't hide who they are." But even as he said it, James felt his anger wavering. He remembered Alexandra's. A face last night, as she'd helped him with the evening chores. The genuine joy when Storm performed his new tricks for her, the way she'd listened to his stories without pity or condescension. "You're right." Alexandra stepped closer, ignoring the watching crowd. "I should have told you everything, but for the first time in years, someone was seeing me, just me, not my company or my bank account. And Storm." She glanced out, the window where the horse grazed peacefully. "He's never been happier than he's been here with you. He needs more than I can give him." James's voice roughened. "More than I can afford." "Maybe it's not about what you can afford." Alexandra's eyes held his. "Maybe it's about what you've already given him, and me. Something that all my money can't buy." The diner held its collective breath. Martha's hand found James's arm, squeezing gently. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the good Lord sends blessings in strange packages. Even CEO-shaped ones." Despite himself, James felt a smile tugging at his lips. He looked at Alexandra, really looked at her, and saw both versions of her at once, the powerful businesswoman and the woman who'd sat under the stars with him, both equally real, equally complex. "I don't need saving," he said finally. Good. Alexandra's smile was tentative but genuine. Because I'm not here to save you. I'm here because somewhere between your homemade horse remedies and Martha's pot roast, I started falling for a man who sees value in things that can't be measured in dollars. In the paddock outside, Storm whinnied again, as if giving his approval to the proceedings. And in a small-town diner, surrounded by neighbors and morning sunlight, two people from different worlds took their first step toward bridging the gap between them. A week had passed since the revelation in the diner, and the Miller farm had settled into a new kind of normal. Alexandra had moved from the hotel to Martha's guest room, despite Michael's horrified protests about security and accommodations. Each morning she'd appear at the farm in work boots and jeans, ready to learn whatever James was willing to teach. "You're holding the rake wrong," James said, trying not to smile as Alexandra battled with the hay in Storm's stall. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, a smudge of dirt on her cheek, making her look more human than CEO. "I run a multi-billion-dollar company," she grunted, adjusting her grip. "I refuse to be defeated by barn chores." The mighty Alexandra Carter, brought low by horse manure. He ducked as she swung the rake handle playfully in his direction. "Just wait until I teach you how to muck out the chicken coop." Storm watched their banter from his stall, head hanging over the door, with what could only be described as amusement. The horse had thrived in the past week, his wounds now just faint marks on his gleaming coat. But it was more than physical healing. He seemed to glow with contentment, especially when his two favorite humans were together. "You know," Alexandra said, leaning on her rake, "I've been thinking about what you said about old family remedies. The healing salve you used on Storm. Have you ever considered marketing it?" James stiffened slightly. "It's not about money." "No," she agreed softly. "It's about helping animals. Think about how many horses could benefit from your father's knowledge." He paused in his work, considering her words. "Dad always said our remedies belonged to the land, not the marketplace." And they still would. Alexandra moved closer, her voice earnest. "But they could also belong to other people who love their horses as much as you do, as much as I do." Before James could respond, Martha's voice called from outside. She appeared in the barn doorway, waving a familiar envelope. "Bank notice came early this month." James's face darkened as he took the letter. Alexandra watched him read it, saw the weight settle back onto his shoulders. Without thinking, she reached for his hand, feeling the calluses under her fingers. "Let me help," she said quietly. "Alexandra, not as a CEO, not as someone with money," she squeezed his hand, "as someone who's seen how much good you do here, how much good you could do with the right support." Storm chose that moment to nudge them both, nearly knocking them into each other. Martha chuckled from the doorway. "That horse has more sense than both of you combined." James steadied Alexandra, his hands lingering on her waist. The morning sun, streaming through the barn slats, painted stripes of light across her face, and he found himself wondering how he'd ever thought her untouchable. "I have an idea," Alexandra said, not moving from his embrace. "A partnership. Turn part of the farm into a horse rehabilitation center. Your knowledge, my resources, equal stakes. I can't match your investment. You already have." She gestured to Storm, to the barn, to all the healing that had happened here. "Some investments can't be measured in dollars, remember?" Martha cleared her throat. "If you two are done making eyes at each other, breakfast is getting cold. And James Miller, don't you dare argue with a good idea just because your pride's getting in the way. Your father believed in partnerships. That's why he married your mother, God rest her soul." James looked around the barn, at the worn but solid beams, at Storm's contented face, at the woman who'd walked into his life during a storm and turned everything upside down. "A partnership," he said slowly, "with conditions. Name them. The remedies stay traditional. No mass production, each batch made with care, the way Dad taught me." Alexandra nodded. "What else? You have to learn to muck stalls properly." A smile tugged at his lips. "Can't have my business partner embarrassing me in front of the horses." Her laughter echoed through the barn, bright and real. "Deal, though I think I'm getting better." "You're terrible," he said fondly, then caught her face in his hands and kissed her. Storm whinnied his approval as Martha quietly slipped away, smiling to herself. Sometimes, she thought, love was less about grand gestures and more about finding someone who made your world bigger just by being in it. In the growing morning light, a CEO and a farmer held each other in a barn that smelled of hay and possibility, while a horse who had brought them together watched with satisfaction. Some partnerships, after all, were written in the stars long before they were written on paper. The peace of Willow Creek shattered early on a Tuesday morning when the first news van pulled up outside the Miller farm. By noon, a dozen more had joined it, their satellite dishes sprouting like metal mushrooms along the road. James watched. From his porch, as reporters trampled his grass, their cameras aimed at every window. "Billionaire CEO finds love in farmland fairy tale." Alexandra read from her tablet, her voice tight. "Carter Industries head trades boardroom for barn. They even have photos of us in the paddock yesterday." "How did they find out?" James asked, though he already knew. In small towns, secrets had a way of growing legs. Alexandra's phone buzzed again, the 20th call from Michael in the past hour. "The board is having a fit," she said, declining the call. "Apparently, my rustic sabbatical is making shareholders nervous." Before James could respond, a sleek black car pulled up, somehow managing to look expensive even with farm dust coating its wheels. Michael emerged, his usual composed demeanor showing cracks of panic. "Miss Carter," he called out, hurrying up the path. "The board has called an emergency meeting. They're concerned about appearances." "Appearances?" Alexandra's voice held. "A dangerous edge. A viral photo of you mucking out stables while the Singapore merger hangs in balance." Michael glanced apologetically at James. "They're questioning your commitment to the company." James felt the familiar weight of reality settling back onto his shoulders. He looked at Alexandra, really looked at her, and saw the CEO warring with the woman he'd come to know. "You should go," he said quietly. "Your company needs you, James." "Miss Carter," Michael interrupted, "there's more. The press has been digging. They found out about Mr. Miller's financial situation. They're spinning it as, well, as what?" James demanded. Alexandra closed her eyes briefly. "As a calculated move by a desperate farmer to save his land by seducing a billionaire." The words hit James like physical blows. Out in the paddock, Storm paced nervously, picking up on the tension. The horse's agitation seemed to mirror the churning in James's gut. "The board is prepared to handle the PR," Michael continued, "but they need you back in Manhattan. Today." A camera flash went off nearby, followed by shouted questions. "Miss Carter, is this a real romance or a publicity stunt? Mr. Miller, how does it feel to date a billionaire? Are you planning to sell the farm?" James watched Alexandra's face shift, saw her corporate mask sliding back into place. This was her world calling her back, a world of boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions, of press statements and shareholder meetings. A world where a failing farmer with dirt under his nails had no place. "I'll get Storm ready for transport," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "What?" Alexandra turned to him, surprise breaking through her CEO facade. "No, James, that's not. It's time to face reality." He gestured at the circus their quiet morning had become. "This isn't some Hallmark movie, Alexandra. You have an empire to run. Storm deserves to be somewhere appropriate." "And what about what I deserve?" she challenged, stepping closer. "What about what I want?" Another camera flash, more questions, the world pressing in from all sides. "What you want?" James laughed bitterly. "Look around. This is who you are. This is your life. I was just a temporary escape." "Miss Carter," Michael pressed, "the board is waiting." James turned away, heading toward the barn. Behind him he heard Alexandra calling his name, but he didn't turn back. Some distances, he thought, were too great to bridge, no matter how much love tried to span the gap. Storm's worried whinny echoed across the farm as dark clouds gathered overhead. Another storm was coming to Willow Creek, and this time it threatened to wash away more than just fences. Alexandra sat in the back of her car, watching the Miller farm recede in the rearview mirror. The board meeting awaited her in Manhattan, along with all the expectations and responsibilities she'd briefly escaped. But something felt different now, like she was leaving a piece of herself behind in that weathered barn. "The PR team has prepared a statement," Michael said from the front seat, his tablet glowing in the growing darkness. A brief romance during a time of personal reflection, now amicably concluded. They think it will play well with the public. "Stop the car, Miss Carter! Stop the car!" Her voice held the steel that had made board members twice her age back down. The driver pulled over immediately. Back at the farm, James stood in Storm's stall, methodically packing the horse's supplies for transport. Each item he placed in the box felt like another piece of his heart being packed away. The special brush Storm loved, the homemade salve that had healed his wounds, the apple treats he'd started keeping in his pocket. "You're being a fool, James Miller?" He turned to find Martha in the barn doorway, leaning heavily on her cane. The morning's excitement had taken a toll. Her face was pale, her breathing labored. "Martha, you should be resting." He moved to help her, but she waved him off. "I'll rest when you stop throwing away the best thing that's happened to you since that horse showed up in your yard." She fixed him with a stern look. "Your father didn't raise a coward. It's not that simple. Love never is." Martha's voice softened. "But that doesn't mean you run from it." A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the barn door, they could see the reporters suddenly scrambling, cameras raising as a familiar figure strode through their midst. Alexandra Carter, CEO of a billion-dollar empire, walked across the muddy farmyard in her expensive shoes, ignoring the shouted questions and flashing cameras. Her face held the same determination James had seen when she'd insisted on learning to muck stalls properly. "You're making a mistake," she said as she entered the barn. "Both of us are." "Alexandra," James started, but she held up a hand. "No, let me finish." She took a deep breath. "All my life, I've done what was expected of me. Run the company, maintain the image, play the game. And I'm good at it, really good. But being here with you and Storm, I remembered something my father told me before he died." "What was that?" James asked softly. He said, "Alex, I built this company so you could have choices. Don't let it become your cage." She moved closer, reaching for his hand. "You're not my escape, James. You're my choice." Storm nickered softly, pushing his nose against their joined hands. Martha dabbed at her eyes with her handkerchief. "The board," James began, "can either accept that their CEO has found something worth more than stock prices, or they can find themselves a new CEO. Alexandra's voice was firm. "I won't give up the company. It's part of who I am, but I won't give up this farm either, or you, or me." A smile tugged at James's lips despite himself, "or you." She squeezed his hand. "So what do you say, farmer? Ready to scandalize the business world by becoming partners with a CEO? Before James could answer, Martha's voice cut in sharply. "Lord, give me strength." She clutched her chest, face contorting in pain, and began to collapse. James caught her before she hit the ground, his heart pounding. "Martha! Martha! I'm calling an ambulance." Alexandra was already on her phone, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. As storm clouds gathered and reporters pressed against the barn windows, two worlds merged in crisis. Sometimes, James would later reflect, it took nearly losing something precious to realize what truly mattered. The waiting room at Willow Creek General Hospital hummed with tension. James sat with his head in his hands, still wearing his mud-streaked work clothes. Beside him, Alexandra spoke quietly but firmly into her phone, her CEO authority cutting through the chaos of the past hour. "I don't care what it takes," she was saying. "Get Dr. Sarah Chen from Manhattan Presbyterian here within the hour. Yes, I understand she's the top cardiologist in the state. That's exactly why I want her." She paused, listening. Then by the helicopter company. James lifted his head. Alexandra, you don't have to. Yes, I do. She ended the call and took his hand. Martha is family to you. That makes her family to me. The emergency room doctor had been direct but hopeful. Martha had suffered a mild heart attack, caught early enough to prevent major damage. But at her age, with her history, they needed a specialist to determine the best course of treatment. Outside the hospital windows, the media circus had followed them. Cameras pressed against the glass, hungry for the story. CEO's romance, interrupted by medical emergency. Michael had stationed security at every entrance, trying to maintain some semblance of privacy. A young nurse hurried up to them. Mr. Miller, Mrs. Wheeler is asking for you. They found Martha propped up in bed, looking frail but alert, various monitors beeping steadily around her. James Miller, she said weakly. If you use this as an excuse to push away that good woman, I'll come back to haunt you. Despite everything, James felt a smile crack through his worry. You're not going anywhere, Martha. Damn right I'm not. Her eyes shifted to Alexandra. Not until I see you two sort out this foolishness. Before either could respond, Michael appeared in the doorway, his face grave. Miss Carter, the board is threatening an emergency vote there. He glanced apologetically at James, concerned about the company's image given recent events. Alexandra straightened, her grip on James's hand tightening. Get them on video. Conference. Now. Minutes later, they stood in an empty hospital conference room, facing a wall of stern faces on a large screen. James had never seen Alexandra in full CEO mode before. She stood like a queen before her court, every inch the business titan she was. Before you start, she cut off the board chairman's opening, let me be clear. This man, she gestured to, James saved my horse when he had nothing to gain. He opened his home and his heart without asking for anything in return. And the woman in that hospital room helped raise him to be that kind of person. Miss Carter, the chairman interjected, while this is all very touching, the shareholders want profit. Fine. Let me tell you about profit. Alexandra's voice turned razor-sharp. James's family remedies, passed down for generations, healed Storm better than any modern treatment. Think about that market. Natural, traditional horse care backed by Carter Industries research and distribution. James watched in amazement as she laid out the business plan they'd discussed in the barn, transforming their dream into corporate strategy. The board members' expressions began to shift from skepticism to interest. And the rehabilitation center, she continued, premium horse care with both traditional and modern methods. Do you know how much old money is in horses? A familiar whinny interrupted the presentation. They turned to find Storm's face pressed against the conference room window. He had somehow followed them to the hospital. The sight of the magnificent horse, living proof of James's healing abilities, seemed to seal the deal. We'll need proper proposals, the chairman said slowly. Business plans, market research. You'll have them. Alexandra's tone brooked no argument. But understand this. James Miller is my partner, in business and in life. That's not negotiable. After the board members signed off, James pulled Alexandra into his arms. Partner, huh? Well, someone has to teach me proper, stable management, she smiled up at him. Besides, I think we make a good team. A commotion from Martha's room drew their attention. The specialist from Manhattan had arrived, already reviewing charts and issuing orders. Through the window, they could see Storm being led away by Michael, who had somehow found him a carrot. Your world or mine? James asked softly. Alexandra touched his cheek. How about we build our own? Thunder rumbled outside. Another storm, approaching Willow Creek. But this time, instead of tearing things apart, it felt like it was clearing the air for something new to grow. 2 weeks after Martha's heart attack, the Miller farm hummed with a new kind of energy. Construction crews worked on renovating the old barn, while architects walked the property, sketching plans for the rehabilitation center. Through it all, James insisted on maintaining the farm's daily rhythms. The morning feeding, the evening checks, the quiet moments that had first brought him and Alexandra together. "Your father would be proud," Martha said from her wheelchair, watching James. Direct workers on the placement of new paddock fencing. She was recovering well under Dr. Chen's care, but still under strict orders to take things easy. Of the construction mess? James teased, but his eyes were soft as he surveyed the changes taking shape around them. Of the man you've become. Martha reached for his hand. Of the way you're honoring his legacy while building something new. Alexandra appeared from the direction of the temporary office they'd set up in the old tack room, tablet in hand but dressed in work clothes. She'd mastered the art of running a corporation while keeping hay out of her hair, mostly. The board approved the final funding, she announced, joining them, and the patent office confirmed we can protect the traditional remedies under a family heritage designation. Everything your father created will stay true to his methods, James. Storm trotted up to the paddock fence, demanding attention from all three humans. The horse had appointed himself unofficial supervisor of the renovation project, watching every change to his domain with keen interest. "He seems to approve," James smiled, scratching Storm's favorite spot. "Though I think he misses having the place to himself." "Just wait until next week," Alexandra grinned. "The first rehabilitation cases arrive on Tuesday. 3 horses, all recommended by top veterinarians who've heard about Storm's recovery." Martha chuckled. "Word travels fast when a billionaire CEO mucking out stalls makes national news." Speaking of news, James nodded toward the road, where a single photographer still lingered. The media frenzy had died down, but their story continued to fascinate the public. "Beauty and the Barn," one magazine had dubbed them, much to James's chagrin and Alexandra's amusement. "Let them look," Alexandra said firmly. "We're building something important here, something real." She was right. The initial business plan had evolved into something bigger than either of them had imagined. Traditional healing methods combined with modern veterinary care. A place where wealthy horse owners could send their animals for recovery, while local farmers could access treatments at subsidized rates. Even the bank had come around, seeing the potential in their vision. "Michael sent over the latest press coverage," Alexandra continued, scrolling through her tablet. "They're calling us innovators, bridging the gap between old wisdom and new. Medicine, as long as they spell my name right," Martha quipped, then grew serious. "Though I do wish they'd stop acting like this is some sort of fairy tale. Real love isn't about princesses and poor farmers. It's about finding someone who makes you better, who helps you build something bigger than yourself." James and Alexandra exchanged glances, remembering those first days after the storm. How far they'd come from her corporate mask and his defensive. "In pride, the contractor wants to know about the house," Alexandra said carefully. They'd been dancing around this subject for days. "The renovation plans need to include a proper office for the CEO of Carter Industries," James finished. "And maybe a bigger kitchen. Martha's going to need somewhere to teach you how to cook. Once she's better." Alexandra's eyes widened. "You mean?" "I mean," he took her hand, "this is your home too now, if you want it to be. Only if we keep the porch swing," she whispered. "It's the best place to watch the sunset." Martha dabbed at her eyes. "Lord, you two are going to give me another heart attack with all this sweetness." But she was beaming as she watched them. Storm whinnied loudly, breaking the moment. A distant rumble of thunder rolled across the farm, another summer storm approaching. But this time no one felt afraid. They'd weathered bigger storms than this together. "I should get the horses in," James said, but Alexandra was already moving. "I've got it," she called over her shoulder. "You finish up with the contractors. I think I can manage basic barn management by now." James watched her go, competent and confident in this world that had once been so foreign to her. Martha patted his arm knowingly. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the best things in life come out of nowhere, like a storm that changes everything." Above them, the clouds gathered and the wind picked up, but on the Miller farm, soon to be the Miller Carter Horse Rehabilitation Center, Everyone was exactly where they needed to be. The autumn sun painted Willow Creek in shades of gold and crimson as guests began arriving at the Miller farm. 6 months had passed since that stormy night when a wounded horse brought two worlds together, and today those worlds would officially merge. The Miller-Carter Horse Rehabilitation Center was ready for its grand opening. The old barn, now restored to its former glory while maintaining its authentic charm, stood proudly at the center of the transformed property. New paddocks stretched across the rolling hills, each designed to provide both comfort and therapy for their equine patients. The farmhouse had been carefully renovated, balancing modern amenities with its historic character, including the porch swing that remained Alexandra's favorite spot. "It's perfect," Martha declared from her position of honor in a comfortable chair near the podium. Her recovery had been steady and complete, thanks to Dr. Chen's continued care and her own stubborn determination. "Though your father would never believe his home remedies would end up in fancy bottles with patents pending." James adjusted his tie, a concession to the formality of the day, and smiled. "As long as they're made the same way he taught me, I think he'd be proud." "Oh, he'd be more than proud." Martha's eyes twinkled. "He'd be crowing from the rooftops about his son marrying the smartest CEO in the country." Before James could respond, a familiar whinny drew everyone's attention. Storm, gleaming and majestic, trotted into the central paddock with Alexandra on his back. She rode with the confidence of months of practice, her business suit somehow looking perfectly at home in the saddle. Behind them came 3 other horses, their first success stories, each recovered from serious injuries through the combination of James's traditional healing and modern veterinary care. The gathered crowd, a mix of local farmers, business, executives, veterinarians, and press, watched in appreciation as Alexandra guided Storm through a series of movements that showed off his perfect recovery. James felt his chest tighten with pride, remembering the wounded, frightened animal that had appeared in his yard that stormy night. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael stepped up to the microphone, every inch the polished corporate executive despite the hay clinging to his Italian shoes. "Welcome to the opening of the Miller-Carter Horse Rehabilitation Center." As Michael began the formal introductions, James made his way to where Alexandra was dismounting. She handed Storm's reins to a stable, and one of several local young people they'd hired and trained in both traditional and modern horse care techniques. "Ready for this?" she asked softly, straightening his tie. "Ready to tell the world I'm marrying the woman who turned my failing farm into a revolutionary healing center?" He pulled her close, ignoring the cameras clicking nearby. "I've been ready since you learned to muck stalls properly." "James Miller," Martha called out, her voice carrying despite its age. "Stop making eyes at your fiancé and get up here. These people came to hear how a billionaire CEO and a stubborn farmer are changing the face of equine medicine." The laughter from the crowd was warm and genuine. This was what had captured the public's imagination, not just the romance, but the way 2 people from different worlds had created something unique by valuing each other's knowledge and traditions. Alexandra took the podium first, every inch the confident CEO. "6 months ago, I thought I was just looking for my lost horse. Instead, I found a way of healing that had been passed down through generations of the Miller family. I found a community that valued tradition and innovation in equal measure. And most importantly," she smiled at James, "I found a partner who taught me that the best investments aren't measured in dollars, but in the lives we touch." She went on to outline their vision, a center that would combine James's family remedies with cutting-edge veterinary care, making both available to horses regardless of their owner's means. The wealthy would pay premium rates for the unique treatment program, subsidizing care for local farmers' horses. Already, their waiting list stretched months into the future. When it was James's turn to speak, he kept it simple. "My father always said that healing isn't just about medicine, it's about heart. About seeing the worth in something or someone, even when they're wounded or lost." He looked at Alexandra, then at Storm, then at the gathered crowd. This center isn't just about healing horses. It's about preserving wisdom that could have been lost, about bridging gaps between worlds that should have met long ago. Storm chose that moment to trot to the podium, nudging both of them with his nose. The crowd laughed again, cameras flashing. To capture the perfect moment, the rescued horse with his two humans, all of them exactly where they were meant to be. The formal speeches gave way to tours and demonstrations. Local farmers mingled with corporate investors, sharing stories and knowledge. Dr. Chen explained how they were documenting the effectiveness of traditional remedies through scientific studies, while Martha held court near the refreshment table, telling anyone who would listen about the night Storm first arrived. As the sun began to set, James found Alexandra at their favorite spot, the porch swing that had survived all the renovations. Storm grazed peacefully nearby, occasionally lifting his head to check on them. "Do you ever miss it?" James asked quietly. "The penthouses, the boardrooms, the simple clarity of just running your company?" Alexandra leaned into him, watching the golden light paint their new world. "I haven't left that world. I've made it bigger, better." She turned to face him. "The board meeting this morning, I took it by video conference from the barn office, wearing muck boots under my blazer. Quite a picture," he chuckled. "The point is," she continued, "I don't have to choose between worlds anymore. Neither of us do. We've built something that honors both our paths." She gestured to where Michael was earnestly discussing feed supplements with one of the local farmers. "Look how natural it all fits together." Martha's voice carried from inside the farmhouse, where she was apparently teaching several corporate executives the proper way to make her famous apple pie. The sounds of laughter and conversation drifted out. Two worlds becoming one. "I love you," James said simply. "Not the CEO, not the business partner, though I love those parts of you too. I love the woman who learned to muck stalls because it mattered to me. Who fights to keep my father's traditions alive while building something new. And I love you," Alexandra touched his cheek. "The farmer, the healer, the man who saw me as just Alexandra, even after you knew who I was. Who taught me that things are worth more than money." Storm wandered over to them, resting his head on the porch railing. The horse who had started it all, who had known somehow that these two humans needed to find each other. As darkness fell over Willow Creek, lights twinkled on in the new barn, where more horses would come to heel. In the old farmhouse, now a perfect blend of past and present, Martha's laughter mingled with the sounds of celebration, and on the porch swing, a farmer and a CEO held each other close, proving that some distances aren't too far to bridge when love lights the way home. A year had passed since the grand opening of the Miller Carter Horse Rehabilitation Center, and spring painted the rolling hills of Willow Creek in vibrant new life. The morning sun cast long shadows across the expanded paddocks, where horses of all breeds and backgrounds grazed peacefully, each with their own story of healing and recovery. Storm stood at the fence of a special enclosure, his proud head hanging over the rail as he watched his new foal take wobbly steps beside its mother. The baby horse, with its rich black coat and single white star, just like its father, represented everything the center had become, a place where new beginnings were born from love and healing. "He's quite the proud father," Alexandra observed, leaning against James as they watched from the porch swing. She'd just finished a video conference with Tokyo, her business suit paired incongruously but perfectly with barn boots. "Takes after his dad," Martha called from her garden nearby, where she was teaching a group of young veterinary students the proper way to grow healing herbs. Her health had fully returned, and she'd appointed herself chief instructor of traditional remedies, ensuring the old ways would live on through new generations. James pulled Alexandra closer, breathing in the morning air that smelled of possibility. The farm had transformed beyond his wildest dreams, yet somehow remained true to everything his father had built. The Miller family remedies, now carefully documented and scientifically validated, helped horses from across the country. More importantly, they remained accessible to local farmers, just as his father would have wanted. Michael appeared from the renovated farmhouse, tablet in hand, but looking completely at home in the country setting. "The latest numbers are in," he announced proudly. "The centre's success rate is making waves in the veterinary community. We've got inquiries from Europe about expanding the program." "Let me guess," James smiled. "Alexandra already has a plan." "3, actually," she admitted, "but they all involve staying right here where we belong." Storm's foal wheeled and kicked playfully, showing off its strength. In its fluid movements, observers could see the perfect blend of natural grace and careful breeding, much like the center itself, which merged tradition and innovation, simplicity and sophistication. The morning brought the usual mix of visitors, wealthy horse owners arriving in luxury cars, local farmers in dusty trucks, veterinarians eager to learn the Miller family methods. But on the grounds of the center, all were equal in their love for the animals in their care. "Your father was right," Martha said softly to James. "Some medicines come from the heart." As if in response, Storm nickered softly to his foal, demonstrating the timeless bond between parent and child, past and future, tradition and progress. On the porch of the home they'd built together, James and Alexandra watched the sun rise on another day of their shared dream. Love, like healing, took many forms. Sometimes it arrived in a storm, sometimes it grew slowly, like herbs in Martha's garden. But when it bloomed, it had the power to transform everything it touched, bridging all distances, healing all wounds, and making space for new beginnings.